There are moments in life when the weight feels heavier than your strength, when needs pile up faster than solutions, and when prayers seem to echo in silence. Bills are due, doors appear closed, opportunities feel delayed, and fear whispers that you are on your own. But hear this clearly and deeply today. God will supply for you. God has never been limited by lack. He is not intimidated by your situation, confused by your circumstances, or surprised by your needs. What feels impossible to you is ordinary to him. The same God who fed Elijah by the brook, who provided manna in the wilderness, who multiplied the widow's oil, and who fed 5,000 with a small lunch is the same God watching over you right now. Provision does not always come the way we expect. Sometimes we are looking for money, but God sends wisdom. We are praying for open doors, but God gives us patience and preparation. We want instant relief, but God is building lasting strength. His supply is not just financial, it is emotional, spiritual, mental, and physical. God supplies peace when anxiety is loud. He supplies hope when despair is heavy. He supplies strength when you are tired and direction when you are lost. Waiting does not mean God is absent. Delays are not denials. Often God is working behind the scenes, aligning people, timing, and circumstances so that when the provision comes, it comes in fullness. What you see as lack may actually be God teaching you trust. What feels like emptiness may be room God is creating to pour something greater into your life. God's supply is connected to obedience and faith. When you walk in his will, even when it is uncomfortable, you place yourself under his covering. You may not see the full picture, but God does. You may not know how it will work out, but God already has the solution prepared. He is not asking you to figure everything out. He is asking you to trust him. Do not measure God's ability by your bank account, your past failures, or your current limitations. God specializes in providing through unexpected channels. He can bless you through people you never imagined, opportunities you didn't apply for, and ways you never planned. What matters is not what you lack, but who you trust. God is not restricted by what you see, what you have, or what you lack. Human limitation does not equal divine limitation. When resources run low, opportunities dry up, and answers seem unavailable, God remains fully capable, fully aware, and fully in control. Your circumstances may feel tight, overwhelming, or impossible, but God does not operate within the boundaries of your situation. He operates from his nature, and his nature is unlimited. We often judge what is possible by what is visible. We look at bank accounts, job titles, connections, qualifications, and past experiences. God does not need any of those things to supply for you. He created everything out of nothing, which means he does not need pre-existing resources to move in your life. What feels like a dead end to you can be a starting point for God. Where you see lack, God sees opportunity. Where you see shortage, God sees a setup for provision. God is not intimidated by numbers, timelines, or probabilities. When the math does not add up, God is not confused. When doors close, God is not stuck. When people walk away, God is not weakened. He is not waiting for conditions to improve before he acts. He can supply in the middle of the storm, not just after it passes. Your hardest season does not scare him, and your deepest need does not overwhelm him. Many times, God allows us to reach the end of ourselves so we can discover the fullness of him. When you realize that your strength is not enough, your wisdom is limited, and your resources fall short, you are positioned to experience God's power. Lack becomes the place where faith is activated. A dependence becomes the doorway to provision. What feels like vulnerability becomes an invitation for God to move. God's supply does not depend on the economy, people's opinions, or favorable circumstances. He can bless you in a famine, promote you in obscurity, and provide for you in isolation. Even when everything around you says, not enough, God's presence declares more than enough. Your situation may change from day to day, but God's ability never changes. When you understand that God is not limited by your lack, fear begins to lose its grip. Anxiety weakens when you realize the burden is not on you to make everything work. You are not responsible for being your own provider. Your responsibility is trust, obedience, and faith. God's responsibility is provision, timing, and outcome. This truth shifts your focus. Instead of asking, how will I survive this? You begin to ask, what is God teaching me here? Instead of panicking over what you don't have, you start thanking God for who He is. Confidence grows when you stop measuring God by your circumstances and start measuring your circumstances by God. What overwhelms your mind does not challenge God's power. Situations that leave you confused, anxious, and exhausted are not obstacles to Him. They are opportunities for His strength to be revealed. When you reach a place where logic fails, options disappear, and answers seem out of reach, that is often where God does His greatest work. Human impossibility is the environment where divine ability operates most clearly. We define impossibility by our experience, our resources, and our understanding. God is not limited by any of these. He is not bound by time, constrained by systems, or restricted by natural laws. What would take years for people to fix, God can shift in a moment. What seems permanently broken to you is fully restorable to Him. The size of the problem does not intimidate God because He is greater than anything He has created. Many times, God allows situations to reach a point where there is no human explanation so that no one can take credit for the outcome except Him. When solutions run out and help is unavailable, faith becomes the only option. In those moments, God teaches you that your reliance must be on Him, not on strategies, connections, or personal effort. The impossibility forces you to trust beyond what you can control. God's power is not activated by how strong you are, but by how surrendered you become. When you admit that you cannot fix it, manage it, or figure it out, you open the door for God to step in. The very thing you see as a limitation becomes this space where God's authority is displayed. What you call impossible is often God calling you to trust Him at a deeper level. Fear grows when you focus on the size of the problem. Faith grows when you focus on the size of God. The problem may look massive from where you stand, but it looks small from God's perspective. He sees the beginning, the middle, and the end all at once. He already knows how it will work out, even while you are still asking how it will start. When God moves in an impossible situation, it changes you. It strengthens your faith, deepens your trust, and reshapes how you see future challenges. Once you have seen God do what you thought could never happen, fear loses its authority. You begin to understand that no situation is final when God is involved, and no obstacle is permanent when placed in His hands. What feels impossible to today may become the testimony you speak about tomorrow. The struggle is not a sign that God is absent. It is often a sign that God is preparing to reveal His power in a way you will never forget. Waiting is one of the most difficult parts of faith because it forces you to trust God without immediate results. In a waiting season, it can feel like nothing is happening, like progress has stopped and prayers are unanswered. But waiting does not mean inactivity. Very often, waiting is God's way of preparing you for what is coming next. While you are waiting, God is working beneath the surface. Preparation happens internally before it ever becomes visible externally. God uses waiting seasons to shape your character, strengthen your discipline, and deepen your dependence on Him. He works on your attitude, your mindset, and your motives. The delay gives you time to grow into the person who can handle the responsibility, pressure, and influence that come with the provision you are asking for. Waiting also exposes areas that still need healing or correction. Impatience, fear, pride, and self-reliance often surface when things are delayed. God does not reveal these weaknesses to shame you, but to refine you. The waiting season becomes a mirror, showing you what needs to change before the next door opens. What God is preparing in you is just as important as what He is preparing for you. During seasons of waiting, God often equips you with skills, wisdom, and experiences that will be necessary later. You may be learning lessons that seem unrelated now, but it will make sense in the future. The discipline you develop, the resilience you build, and the faith you strengthen during this time will support you when the provision finally arrives. Waiting teaches you how to trust God without guarantees. It trains you to walk by faith instead of sight. When everything is uncertain, you learn to rely on God's promises rather than visible outcomes. This kind of trust creates spiritual maturity and stability, making you less shaken by future challenges. What feels like delay is often development. God is not wasting time in your waiting season. He is intentionally shaping you so that when the moment comes, you are ready, capable, and aligned with His purpose. When we think of provision, we often limit it to money, resources, or material needs. But God's supply goes far beyond finances. God understands that your deepest needs are not always things you can buy. There are seasons when money cannot fix what is broken inside, and success cannot heal what is hurting in your heart. In those moments, God provides in ways that sustain you from the inside out. There are times when your bank account may be low, but your peace must remain full. God supplies calm in the middle of chaos, reassurance in moments of fear, and rest when your mind refuses to slow down. Emotional provision looks like strength to face another day, courage to keep moving forward, and comfort when grief feels heavy. God meets you in places no one else can reach and restores what stress, disappointment, and pressure have worn down. Spiritual provision comes when your faith feels weak and your connection feels distant. God supplied you trust when doubt creeps in clarity, when confusion clouds your vision. He feeds your spirit with truth when lies try to dominate your thoughts. Even when you feel spiritually dry, God provides nourishment that revives your hope and realigns your focus with His purpose. Mental provision is just as powerful. God supplies clarity when your thoughts are scattered, wisdom when decisions feel overwhelming, and focus when distractions pull you in every direction. He guards your mind against anxiety and replaces constant worry with assurance. When your thoughts feel out of control, God's provision brings stability and perspective, helping you see beyond the immediate pressure. Physical provision also matters to God. He supplies strength when your body feels weak, endurance when exhaustion sets in, and healing in ways that restore your ability to function. Sometimes His provision is rest, sometimes it is renewed energy, and sometimes it's the discipline to care for yourself when you have been neglecting your well-being. God knows exactly what kind of provision you need in every season. He does not give randomly or carelessly. He provides with purpose, meeting the need that matters most in that moment. Even when it doesn't look like what you asked for, it is often what you truly need to survive, grow, and continue forward. When answers do not come quickly and breakthroughs seem postponed, it is easy to assume that God has said no. But a delay is not a denial. God's timing is deliberate, thoughtful, and purposeful. He sees beyond the moment you are in and understands what must happen before the blessing can be released. What feels like waiting to you is often God carefully preparing every detail. God is never late, and He is never rushed. While you are watching the clock, God is shaping character, building endurance, and aligning circumstances. He knows what you are ready to receive and what you are not yet prepared to handle. A blessing given too early can harm you, distract you, or pull you away from His plan. The waiting season is often God's protection, not His punishment. Delays stretch your faith. They teach you to trust God when there is no visible progress and no clear timeline. In waiting, you learn dependence instead of control. You discover whether your faith is rooted in outcomes or in God himself. The silence you feel does not mean God is inactive. It often means he is working in ways you cannot yet see. God also uses delays to align people and opportunities. There are conversations that must happen, doors that must open, and paths that must cross at the right moment. If God moved too soon, things would be incomplete. His timing ensures that when provision comes, it is sustainable, stable, and lasting, not temporary or fragile. Waiting refines your patience and strengthens your spiritual maturity. It forces you to confront fear, impatience, and doubt. In that process, God reshapes your mindset so you are able to handle what is coming next. The delay prepares you to steward the provision wisely instead of losing it quickly. What feels like a pause in your life is often a setup for something greater. God's timing considers your future, not just your present discomfort. Even when you do not understand the reason for the delay, you can trust that God's timing is intentional, precise, and always working for your good. There are seasons when it feels like nothing is changing, no doors are opening, and no answers are coming. From the outside, it appears as if God is silent or distant. But the absence of visible progress does not mean the absence of divine activity. God often does his greatest work behind the scenes in places you cannot see and in ways you cannot track. God is constantly aligning circumstances, moving people, and positioning opportunities long before they show up in your life. While you are focused on what is not happening, God may be rearranging things you are not aware of. Conversations are taking place, decisions are being influenced, and paths are being redirected, all according to his plan. Just because you cannot see it does not mean it is not happening. Many times God hides his work so that your faith can grow. If everything was visible, trust would not be necessary. Faith built when you believe God is working even when there is no evidence yet. These unseen moments teach you to rely on God's promises rather than on immediate results. They strengthen your confidence in who God is, not just in what he does. God also works in hidden ways within you. While you are waiting for external change, he may be adjusting your perspective, softening your heart, or strengthening your resolve. Internal transformation often happens quietly, without announcement or recognition, but it prepares you for what is coming. When the breakthrough arrives, you realize that God was shaping you long before you noticed any movement. Behind the scenes work ensures that when God's provision becomes visible, it is solid and lasting. He is not interested in temporary fixes or unstable solutions. He is building something that will endure. That requires time, careful planning, and unseen preparation. What feels slow to you is often precise to God. Trust grows when you learn to believe that God is active even in silence. The lack of visible progress does not mean your prayers are ignored or your faith is wasted. God is always working even when you cannot trace his hand. Obedience is not just about following rules, it is about alignment. When you walk in obedience to God, you position your life under his direction, guidance, and covering. God's provision flows most freely when your steps are aligned with his will. Obedience places you where God can bless you in ways that go beyond what effort alone can achieve. Many people want God's provision without God's instruction, but obedience demonstrates trust. It says you believe God knows what is best, even when his direction does not make sense to you. Sometimes God asks you to move when you feel unready, to wait when you want to rush, or to let go when you want to hold on. These moments test whether you trust his wisdom more than your own understanding. Obedience often requires sacrifice. It may cost you comfort, familiarity, or approval from others, yet God uses those sacrifices to open doors you could not open by yourself. When you choose obedience over convenience, you place yourself in a position where God can respond with provision that sustains and protects you. What you give up in obedience is never greater than what God provides in return. God's instructions are often connected to future provision. What He asks you to do today may be preparing the way for what He plans to give you tomorrow. A simple act of obedience can unlock opportunities, connections, or blessings you did not anticipate. Even small steps taken in faith can lead to significant outcomes over time. Obedience also builds spiritual sensitivity. The more you follow God's voice, the clearer His guidance becomes. You begin to recognize when to move, when to pause, and when to trust. This awareness helps you avoid unnecessary struggles and positions you to receive what God has already prepared for you. Walking in obedience does not mean life becomes easy, but it means you are walking with God's support. Even in challenging seasons, obedience keeps you under His provision, protection, and purpose. Faith is not built in moments of instant answers. It is formed in seasons where you must trust God without visible evidence. When results are delayed and prayers seem unanswered, faith is stretched beyond comfort. It is easy to believe when everything is working out, but true faith develops when you continue to trust God, even when nothing appears to be changing. Trusting without immediate results requires you to rely on God's character rather than your circumstances. You may not see progress, but faith reminds you of who God is and what He has already done. Every step taken without confirmation strengthens your spiritual muscles. Each day you choose to trust instead of panic, faith becomes deeper and more resilient. God often withholds immediate results to deepen your dependence on Him. If answers came instantly, faith would remain shallow and fragile. Delayed outcomes force you to seek God more earnestly, listen more closely, and surrender more fully. In these moments, faith shifts from being conditional to being rooted and stable. When you trust God without seeing results, your perspective changes. You begin to focus less on what you lack and more on what God is doing within you. Patience grows, endurance develops, and your confidence in God becomes less dependent on circumstances. Faith becomes a lifestyle, not a reaction to blessings. Trusting without results also protects you from discouragement. Instead of being driven by emotions, you learn to stand on promises, even when doubt tries to rise. Faith anchors you in truth. You may not understand the process, but you trust that God is faithful to complete what He has started. Over time, this kind of faith reshapes how you respond to challenges. Fear loses its power, impatience weakens, and hope becomes stronger. A faith that is built in unseen seasons becomes unshakable. When results finally appear, God understands your desires, but His provision is guided by His purpose. What you want is often shaped by what feels comfortable, immediate, or familiar, while God's supply is shaped by what will grow you, protect you, and align you with His plan. God does not simply give what you ask for, He gives what you need in order to fulfill the purpose He has placed on your life. There are times when God says no to a specific request because He sees what it would cost you in the long run. What looks good in the moment may delay your growth or distract you from what truly matters. God's provision is intentional and thoughtful. He supplies in ways that strengthen your faith, refine your character, and prepare you for what lies ahead. God's purpose-driven provision often stretches you beyond your comfort zone. He may provide opportunities that challenge you, responsibilities that require growth, or paths that demand trust. While this can feel uncomfortable, it is often the very thing that leads to lasting transformation. God is more concerned with who you are becoming than with keeping you comfortable. When God supplies according to His purpose, it protects you from harm you cannot see. He knows which doors would lead to frustration, burnout, or compromise. By guiding provision through His purpose, God ensures that what you receive supports your spiritual, emotional, and long-term well-being, not just your immediate satisfaction. Learning to trust God's purpose requires humility. It means accepting that God's perspective is higher than yours. source. Even when his provision looks different from what you expected, it carries wisdom and foresight. Over time, you begin to recognize that what God withheld was just as loving as what he provided. When you align your desires with God's purpose, disappointment loses its grip. You begin to see provision as guidance rather than reward. God's supply is not random. It is carefully designed to lead you toward the life he has prepared for you. Fear and doubt are natural responses when challenges arise, but they only gain power when your attention stays fixed on the problem instead of the provider. When you focus on the difficulty, the obstacle seems larger, the solution seems distant, and your faith becomes small. However, when you intentionally turn your focus to God, his power, his promises, and his faithfulness, fear begins to lose its grip and doubt starts to fade. Problems can feel overwhelming because they are immediate, visible, and tangible, while God's work is often invisible and unfolds over time. A fear thrives in uncertainty, but faith thrives in trust. By keeping your mind on who God is rather than what is happening around you, you shift from a perspective of limitation to one of possibility. You begin to see that your situation does not define your outcome, God does. Focusing on God also changes your emotional state. Anxiety, worry, and panic weaken when your thoughts dwell on God's character instead of the problem. And Scripture reminds us that God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. When this truth becomes your focus, you realize that the obstacle is temporary, but God's presence is eternal. Doubt decreases as you recall God's past faithfulness. Remembering how he has provided, protected, and then guided in previous seasons strengthens your trust for the current challenge. Fear loses its voice when you replace, "I can't handle this," with "God is able." Your focus be anchored in his ability rather than your inability. Focusing on God does not remove the problem instantly, but it shifts your perspective. You start to see opportunities, guidance, and solutions that were invisible when your mind was consumed with worry. Every time you choose to redirect your attention from fear to faith, you strengthen your spiritual resilience and invite God to work more freely in your life. Fear and doubt only dominate when you keep your eyes on circumstance. By deliberately turning your gaze to God, you not only diminish fear, but also activate the peace, confidence, and courage that come from trusting him. Your problem may remain present, but your perspective changes, and that change is often the first step towards seeing God's provision manifest. God's provision does not always come in the way you anticipate. Sometimes it comes through doors you never knocked on, people you never expected to meet, or opportunities you never imagined. When you rely on your own understanding of how provision should arrive, you may miss the extraordinary ways God chooses to supply your needs. His creativity and wisdom surpass human planning, and he often works in ways that surprise us. Many times, God uses people as instruments of his provision. It could be a mentor offering guidance, a stranger offering help, or a friend extending an unexpected opportunity. You may not understand why this person appears in your life at this exact moment, but God's timing is perfect. What seems coincidental is often carefully orchestrated to meet your need and fulfill his plan. Opportunities all appear in places you never expected. A closed door might redirect you to a path that leads to growth, blessing, or fulfillment. God's ways are higher than ours, and his supply may come through unconventional means. He sometimes opens windows when you are looking for doors, and that requires faith to step into what you cannot yet fully understand. Unexpected provision also teaches humility and dependence. When God provides through someone else or an unforeseen situation, it reminds you that your efforts alone are not enough. You begin to recognize God's hand in every aspect of your life, and gratitude grows. Provision through others is a divine lesson in trust, community, and awareness that God is always at work. Sometimes these surprises are designed to test your obedience and responsiveness. Will you accept help when it comes in an unusual form? Will you step through an unfamiliar opportunity, trusting that God knows what He is doing? Faith is strengthened when you recognize that God's methods do not need to match your expectations. They just need to be followed. God's provision is not limited to your imagination. By remaining open to unexpected sources, you allow God to work freely, often exceeding what you thought was possible. The key is awareness, readiness, and a willingness to act when He presents the opportunity, no matter how unconventional it may seem. When you start expecting the unexpected from God, you no longer limit His provision. Every person, every situation, and every opportunity becomes a potential channel for God's supply, reminding you that His ways are far beyond what you can plan or predict.